Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be covering how to do leaderboard lists in Bubble. So for example, you want a top 5 list of customers, or you want a top 5 list of students or teams or workout things, then this is going to show you. And the reason I'm doing this is because this comes up a lot on the forum in Bubble. I know I've answered it a couple of times and I just thought it'd be a good topic to do as a video. So then let's get going with this. So what I've got at the moment is I've just got a repeating group here with 3 columns for the customer, number of sales and total sales. Now I've seen people require this for lots of different things, but I tend to focus on business style apps. So this is basically how I'm doing it for customers. So you'll be able to see for each customer how many sales they've done and what their total sales are. The main thing to take into consideration when doing a leaderboard type display is the data. The data structure is key with this. Okay, so if we look at our data here, and at the moment I've got something called business entity, which if you've seen my previous videos, this is just where I store my customers and my suppliers all in the same place because we've all got common data, so they're all stored in the same place. What you'll notice here is, sorry, I've got a different table listed. What you'll notice here is that I don't have like a list of transactions. Okay, the reason being is that lists, when you do a list of something on a table, on a type, you should really only have those as lists if you know that the amount of data that you're going to store on them is only going to be very small. You know, at most a few dozen, well, 100 at the most. And also it makes it very difficult to do this type of thing where you need to sort a list of customers or whatever it may be, students, by the number of a value, whether that's a sales value, whether that's a number of sales, whether that's points for a team, whether that's marks on a test, whatever it may be. The other thing as well, that what some people do is to avoid doing what I'm doing in this video, is they will put like a field on a business entity which is for the total value. Now it's one way of doing it. The only trouble with it is that it's kind of inflexible, because if you then want to say, well, what were the sales in this period or what were the sales in that period, you can't really get that information. So the best way to do it is how I'm going to show you now. So we've got business entity which is for customers, for example, and then we've got the transaction table, and we have a field called value which stores the total value of that transaction in terms of the net value of the transaction, which basically is the turnover in terms of the the sales value of the transaction for the customer. And then we've got the business entity as well, so that we can actually reference that in the list. Okay, so again, don't put things like any data that you're relying on, that's whether it could be a test, it could be a game, it could be whatever, a workout, whatever it may be, a list of things that's got a date on it. Okay, don't have that as a list attached to the main reference data. So in this case customer, in your case it may be student or team. Okay, don't have that as a list field, have it as a separate table and have a foreign key or a link back to the other type. Hope that makes sense. So let's go here. So what we're going to do here on the repeating group is, at the moment I've got no data source and I've got a type of content of grouping, and we're going to go through that next. Okay, grouping is not a specific data type, by the way. So if we go to data source, what we want to do is we want to do a search for, and the type of data is going to be the data that we need to sum up, which is going to be in this case transactions, because that's where we're going to get the data from to give us the totals. So we're going to say transaction, and we're going to put a constraint on there because we only want a certain type of transaction to be added up, and because it's for sales, so we'll say the type has to be, sorry my mouse is jumping about a little bit, and invoice. Okay, so we'll leave that there for now. You can tell it's trying to recommend that I change the type of content. I'm not going to do that in a minute. So then what we're going to do there is we then need to group by that. We obviously don't want a list of transactions. What we want is for it to total those up per customer or per business entity. So therefore we have to group by the business entity. So Bubble offers us a command which is group by, and when we select that, we then get this other dialog here that says add a new grouping and add a new aggregation. So let's click add a new grouping, And the field on the transaction that we want to group by is the business entity. So we want to group by the customer. And there's only one type of grouping that we're offered, which is exact, as it suggests here. And then what we want to do is to sum the value on the transaction for each business entity, for each customer. So what we do is add a new aggregation. Aggregation is a database terminology really, which just references anything along here. So you're aggregating data up to give you an answer, whether it's a count, a sum, an average. I don't actually know what product is, to be honest. I'll have to look that up. The medium, average might be a good way to, if you want to see the average sales value across a period of time, minimum, maximum, etc. In this case, we just want to do sum. And it's going to ask us what field that we want to do that by. So in this case, it's going to be value. Okay. So what essentially we're doing there is we're getting a search for list of transactions. We're grouping by the business entity. So in other words, we're going to get a record for every business entity that it comes across assigned to a transaction. We're going to get one record back, and then we're going to return the sum of the value for each one, and that will get us a total value of sales for each customer. So we've done that there. So what we're going to do, I think that's pretty much it for now. We can kind of leave that there just to show how this is working. So just let me check that we've got this right. So type of content is grouping. The reason it's done that is because we've done a group by, because it's not a specific type of data. This one is just getting us back a few little bits and bobs based on this data source here. So what I'm going to do on this particular, in this cell, I've got all of these boxes, all these text boxes in a group. So I just want to make sure that that's the right one. So it's going to be current sales grouping. Yeah, that's fine. And what we want to do here then is to say we want the customer's name. So what we can do is to say that the parent group's grouping business entity, because it's grouped by business entity, so it'll get us that back, and then we can say their name. Okay, and that'll display that in there. We'll leave that for a moment, the number of sales. In total sales, we're going to say that we want the parent group's grouping, and then it gives us this field here for sum of value. Okay, and that's the what they call the aggregation. Basically, we've told it to sum the value for each customer, and then we can actually get that value, and then I can go and format that with 2 decimal places, etc., etc. Okay, and so let's take a look at that and just see if that's gonna do for us. Okay, so it's got our data there. So it's got all of our customers that it's found and all of our sales. You can see that it hasn't actually sorted it. It kind of looks like it has in a way, isn't it? But you can tell it hasn't, because that nice value here should be at the top. So at the moment it's not actually sorting it. It's not giving us the leaderboard that we need. So let's go and sort that out. And this is where that bit we've done so far is fairly easy. Okay, this bit where you're sorting it into leaderboard order by the summed value that we need to sort it by. If we hadn't got our data structured correctly and we'd put it in lists within the customer, we wouldn't be able to do this next step. We'd find it very difficult to do. So yeah, okay, so we say more, and then what we can do is just say sorted. There we go. And then we're going to sort it by the sum of value, which is really good in Bubble, because even when you're querying databases, when you've got quite a lot of control, that's not an easy thing to do, to get a sum of transactions and then actually be able to sort that list by that sum. It's not difficult, it's not straightforward. So the fact that Bubble makes it straightforward for us is really good. We want to sort it by descending order so that the highest value is at the top. Okay, and then we'll close that, and then let's go and refresh this, and we should see the highest valued customer at the top. There we go, from top to bottom. Okay, so we've got about 6 or 7 customers there. Let's say you wanted to just restrict what you get back to, say, the top 5. So let's say you got a dashboard and you want that to display on the dashboard, you just want your top 5s. So what you can do there is dead easy, is just to say items until number 5. Okay, and then we run that again, We just get the top 5 customers in there. So at the moment we're not getting the number of sales, so let's see how we can do that now. Okay, so what we can do here is with the number of sales, what we need to do in our grouped by is go back to that, and we get an option to add another aggregation. So in this one we're just going to say count, and that way we're going to get the sum of the value, and we're going to count how many records or transactions we actually get back for each customer. Again, the break is always in the group by. Okay, now let's have a look at this. Sometimes it gets a little bit funny with the parent groups. Yeah, it's not giving us the group value, so let's just have a look at that one. Because we've added a new aggregation, it then considers it to be a different type of grouping, so we just clear that expression. Current sales grouping again, same thing, and then in here what we can say, just let's clear that expression, and then we can say parent groups grouping is count. Okay, and again we can just format that so there's no decimal places. Okay, and that will get us the number of sales back for each customer again. Cool, and then obviously we could sort by that if you wanted to. You want to see how many customers have come back and bought them on the most occasions. Whatever you want to do, or average, or whatever you want to do with that is pretty handy. So the next thing I wanted to look at is what happens in the scenario like I've got here, whereby all of my customers and suppliers are all stored in a single data type. Okay, so in here they're all stored as a business entity, and they're all given a type, which is business entity type, and that could contain anything. So how do I make sure that in my list of sales, my customers in here, that I only get the customers, I don't get any of the suppliers mixed in with that as well? So what effectively I'm going to ask it to do is to, even though the actual query, if you like, for the list is all based around the transaction, and I can put as many constraints on the transaction as I want. However, I want to put a constraint on the business entity type, okay, because I want to say only include those where the type is of this particular business entity type. Now, another example could be, let's say that you've got a list of teams or a list of students in a city or a country, and on the student record you've got the city, or on the, it could even be restaurants or whatever, you could have a city on there, and you wanted to make sure that you wanted to see all the sales or the points or the marks or whatever it may be for a particular, for all of the students, restaurants, customers in that city. Okay, and the city will be stored on the customer itself, so it's not sat on the transaction. So let's have a look at that, because it's not straightforward. Because if you have a look here, this is our condition. We can't actually add a constraint on that. So for example, we could say business entity. We can't then say business entities type, for example. We just get the whole business entity. Okay, and if you look at the group by, again, we can't put a constraint on the business entity itself, because you can imagine everything's going on the transactions, and the business entity isn't the type, it's just the field that we're grouping by that just happens to be of the same name, business entity. It's the field business entity, not the type business entity. So when we're doing the group by, we can't actually put a constraint on there to say, group by business entity of type business entity, where business entity is of type such a thing. So we can't really do that. So the way to get around it, the easiest and simplest way to get around it is to use a filter. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, in here I'm just going to get rid of this last statement where we limit the items, just so that I can put a filter on there. So we can obviously use the filtered option, and we can add a constraint, and what we need to do there is to say advanced, because if we just do business entity, we just get the same problem all over again. Okay, we have to actually say that we want an advanced filter. Now, an advanced filter it's important to understand what this does, excuse me, inside Bubble. An advanced filter will go and get all of the information that you've asked for, and then when it returns it back to the client, Bubble's runtime engine on the client in the browser or whatever is then going to manually sift through that to apply this filter. But it does give us the way to do it, so we can then say that this grouping, business entities, and then we can say type is customer. Okay, and that will work, no problem at all with that. It will work. Now I've only got customers in there, but you get the point. That it will then, if there's any suppliers, any records of type supplier within my list of business entities, they will get filtered out. However, they will get sent from the server over the wire to the browser, and then Bubble in the background will then apply that filter manually. Okay, so you've got to be aware of how it's applying the filter for performance purposes, because if you know that you've got the potential for it to be returning a lot of information, then you know the filter is going to be slow and performance is going to get hit. So what I would tend to do is to, if you know that you're only going to get a few records back or a small number of data, I mean obviously up to a couple of hundred records it's not really an issue, but if you know you could be running into thousands, tens of thousands, etc., then I would steer clear of filtering. Okay, I would just steer clear of it altogether. Right, I tend to steer clear of it because it would be a bigger problem for me to solve further down the line than it would be to just solve it now. So the way that generally you'd solve it now, and I've mentioned this in another video that I've done as well, is essentially when you're designing your data types and your data structure, is to always optimize for reads rather than writes. So in other words, rather than worry about how much data you're storing here, there, and everywhere, okay, which only gets stored once, maybe, and maybe updated once or twice or whatever, even if it's updated 50 times over its lifetime, that will pale into insignificance to the number of times you'll actually have to query that. So generally speaking, the way to handle it would be then to store an extra field on transactions, and that way you could then add a constraint on the transactions, so the server deals with the filtering out of the suppliers or whatever condition that you need, rather than having it return all that data and letting the client filter it in the background. And whatever happens on the server in the database, that's all native to the database. It just happens very, very quick. So in this case, on the transaction, I've got a field called BE type, which is business entity type. So I've duplicated that on here. So whenever I write a transaction, I have to fill this in. So I've got to remember to do that. But again, I only need to do that once, or maybe if they update it. So it's only going to be in one or two places in my app. Whereas the number of times the user can query for transactions could run, hundreds of thousands of times. So, and imagine if you put this kind of thing on a dashboard, that's going to get run every time your app opens by virtually every user. So you've got to take that into account. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this filter, and I'm going to go back to the search for transactions, and I'm going to add a constraint, and I'm going to say that the BE type is customer. Okay, again, it's your preference. You do it whichever way you want to. I would say that unless you know for sure that the filter is never going to run into more than 100, 200 records, don't use it. Again, just a way to optimize for speed with performance, because using test data you won't be able to tell, but once users start piling on their data, then it will become obvious pretty quickly, and at that point you kind of it's a lot more difficult to correct. So I'll put that on there as well, and that's just something that I would advise you do. The point I'm trying to get at is when you're doing this type of grouping, you cannot put a constraint on the grouped by type, so you have to find a way around it. And I know there could be a way to do it. I've tried my very best to find a way around it. We did using different merge by and intersect with and things like this, but because of the type of grouping that you're doing, it's difficult to then get a compatible search that Bubble likes. So that's the only way that I found to do it. Right, okay. Last thing I wanted to cover here is, let's say at the moment that's going and getting all transactions from the beginning of time. But let's say you wanted to do something like, I just want to see transactions or the total of sales, my top 5 customers for the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, the last 6 months or whatever. Okay, so what I've got here is I've already prepared this earlier on, so I'm just gonna, I've put that in a group, so I will just I'll copy this and I will paste it into here. Okay, I've just got to get rid of the margin that I've put on it. Okay, and rather than do this from scratch, what I've done is I've applied some conditionals. So let me show you how this is going to work here. What we're going to do is we're going to put another conditional, another constraint on our search for transactions, and this one is going to be date based. Okay, so what I've done is I've added on the page a couple of custom states, and what we have is filter days, which I've set by default to -90, and I've put today's date, which is just the today's date, stripping out the time, which I always do anyway, and all I do is on a workflow there, it's just on page loaded, where I get the current date and time and just strip the seconds, minutes and hours to 0. The main one that I want you to look at in the custom states is this filter days, because we're going to use that to let them click on a button and then set the period that they want to see the top 5 for. So let's have a look at this. I've put a conditional as well, so that when they click on a button to highlight it, it shows the button in green. Okay, so for example, when the filter days is -30, which will happen, we'll set that up in a minute. When they click it, it's then going to show that in green, and this one is -60 days and -90 and 183, which is roughly 6 months, and 365, which is a year, all but the leap year. And what we need to do then is to set this value to determine how far back the information, the figures that we're going to get will go. So, but before that, let's set our constraint on here, along with the other two we've put in there. And this time we're going to say that the date of the transaction has to be greater than or equal to, and then what we can do then is to say LB today's date, and what we do then is we say, where are we? Sorry, plus days, and then we can say LB is filter days, and that's why the filter days was minus, but why we're using the minus value in filter days, because what we're saying there is that we only want to see figures where the date is greater than today's date minus by the number of days that they select. So in other words, from today's date -30, when they click that, -60, -90, and that will do the job for us. So the only thing that we need to do then is to implement these workflows to set our custom state to make that work. So on here, let's just do that, start edit workflow, and what we will do is we will say element actions, set state, and it's on the page, and filter days, and the value is just going to be -30 because they just want to see the figures for the last 30 days. If it will go in 30 days, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to copy that and go back and go to our last 60 days button, do that, and paste the action in, and we just need to change that to be -60 days. Okay, and design, let's do 90 days, and you can kind of see why I didn't why I set a lot of this up beforehand, because this can be a little bit tedious. But -90, there we go. Okay, design, and last 6 months, which I set to 183, I believe, so paste that in there, 183, which is roughly half a year, and last but not least the last year, so authority workflow, and paste that in, and this time 365. Okay, so by default we said that we set that to 90 days, didn't we, by default? Okay, so let's see what happens when we run that. Okay, so we get a leaderboard, so let's try last 60 days. Yeah, last 30 days. Yeah, so we can sort of just skip and just have a look at the last 6 months and this last year. So you can see what's happening there. You can really go to town on this stuff. I've just done a fairly basic date arithmetic there just to make this work. You could obviously make it work to just look for the calendar months and all of that sort of stuff. It's a bit, for me to go into that, the video would go on, and I tend to find that the longer the videos that I make are, the less people watch them. So yeah, I'm trying to keep this as short as I possibly can. So yeah, that's just a great way of being able to set that up. Just in case I lost you a little bit with that one, all that we've done is set a constraint on the transactions when we do the search for, and we just limit the transactions based upon the today's the date of the transaction has got to be greater than today's date minus plus days filter days. So in other words, if you click 60 day say 30 days, then the date on the transaction has got to be today's date minus 60 days, 30 days, or whatever you select effectively. And on here with the buttons, I've just put conditionals on each one that to display in green as and when, depending on what that filter days is, and so we get that effect. Okay, so you can do loads and loads with this. It's really cool. It's fairly straightforward once you understand it. So yep, I'll close that off there. I hope I've not lost anybody. Sorry if I have. By all means, ask any questions in the comments, or if you want me to make any videos to extend this, or if you want me to make a video roughly around this but maybe show you something else, then please leave a comment below. Please like the video as well, of course. Please subscribe and click the bell if you really like this and you want to get notified of future videos. It all helps. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you saw an advert in this video, I don't get paid for that. My channel isn't monetized. Google gets the money. So just so you're aware of that. When I get to so many subscribers, I forgot exactly how many it is, then I can switch that off, because I don't intend to monetize this channel. That's not what it's here for. It's to pay it forward effectively. So listen, thanks again for watching. Again, please comment if you got any questions, or you just want to say hi. Appreciate your time watching this. Have a cracking day and take it easy.